I want to just make one point here. Drawing these objects, these volumetric shapes, the cylinder, the sphere, the cone, and the cube. If you'll notice what I'm doing, and that's why I have my camera turned on, I'm using my entire arm. It may not seem like it, but that's really the key to get line confidence. And that's why some of these exercises that I've already shared with you are important. Those line confidence and line exercises are meant to go ahead and encourage you to use your entire arm so you can develop really confident marks. In the beginning, when you're working with a slate tablet and you're having to do this, it will be a little bit disconcerting, it will be a little bit weird, but I think just like playing with video game controllers, at some point you kind of know where things are. You have to work your way up to that point, and then you'll get comfortable. So just keep at it and don't get discouraged. You can do it. So we talked about these volumetric shapes before. We also talked about this grid in the last video. We talked about finding midpoints. We talked about contours. So in this video, what we're going to do is we're going to actually make a grid, and we're going to put objects on that grid. So let's make a brand new layer. I'll hide what I currently have, and let's just go ahead and start off by creating a grid. We'll start off with one line. I'm holding down the Shift key, and I'm using that pencil brush, and I will now come out here somewhere and make another line as follows and draw a grid. Does not have to be perfect, and you always want, when you're drawing these lines that are coming down that are somewhat vertical, you always want to pull the lines towards you. That's really, really important. And then we're going to find the midpoint. Command Z or Control Z is undo. And if you don't get it right, see, this is I'm hitting undo a couple of times because it still takes some practice. Again, using my entire arm. So I'm going to find the midpoint again, find the midpoint. I'm going to construct a grid, and then I'm going to place objects on that grid. So I'm finding the midpoint, making my connections. And so we have our basic grid. What I want to do now is I'll just label this as grid. Double clicking on the layer allows you to label it, and then let's lock this layer so we don't accidentally draw on it. All right, now let's make a brand new layer above our existing layer. By now you should be echoing the same commands, Shift Option Command N or Shift Alt Control N. And what we're going to do now is we're going to draw just a simple cylinder, right? So this cylinder exists, and by putting it on its own layer, we can kind of move it around in space. The cylinder is pretty easy because as long as it looks like it is either resting on the plane or anywhere within this planar surface, it'll look like it's actually going to belong. So that's really the easiest shape to draw on a grid. But now, if we make another layer here, let's go ahead and draw a cylinder. So what we can do there is, let's first establish a line. This is going to be the long end of the cylinder, and then we'll create a circle. We'll create another circle on the far end, and then we'll connect that. So now what we've done is by projecting this line on the grid, now it seems like that cylinder is resting on the grid. And then we can, of course, draw our contours. Now, we'll be doing this contour thing for our other drawing exercises, and when you're doing your drawing assignments, if you're, say, following the Etherington Brothers tutorials or looking at someone else's work or drawing from reference, for example, I want you to, see if you can start out with these basic shapes as building blocks. And these are our primitive shapes. There are complex shapes, which I'll talk about later on. But primitive shapes are really, really important to understand. So I've got a sphere, I've got a cylinder, and again, I've got the flexibility of moving this guy around, and as long as it's on that planar surface, it's good. I can even overlap, right? But see, when part of the cylinder is actually above the grid, it kind of destroys that illusion that it's resting on the grid. So as long as I've got it somewhere within that space, good. Let's go ahead and draw a cone. So the way we'll draw a cone, we'll have the cone's base resting on the surface, so we'll just draw an ellipse, and then we'll draw a point, and we'll connect those two together, and we'll draw our contours. And as long as it's fully on the grid, it's going to look believable. And then the last shape that we'll go ahead and draw, I'll make a new layer for this, is the cube. And what I'm going to do is I'm just going to, again, I'll make a diagonal line like this. I'll now make a vertical line like this. Basically, I'm going to construct one face of our cube, I guess more rectangular shape in this case, and then I'll draw a thinner variant. And notice what's happening here. These top and bottom edges are tapering to a point, right? Like you'll notice that these ends are kind of, if I were to extend these lines out, they will eventually connect at some point in the future. Same thing with this. These two lines will eventually connect somewhere out here in the future. But this is drawing a cube in the proper perspective. And just a quick aside, I know that when we were all in middle school, you were probably shown a cube like this. And the problem with drawing it in this way is that it doesn't have any perspective. It's just basically an isometric drawing. So we're trying to draw things that look believable, so we're implying perspective when we draw. And then of course we can draw our contours, find the midpoint, connect the lines. And everything is on its own grid, or it's on its own layer rather, so it allows me to move things as needed. So that's placing objects on a grid in the simplest sense, and we'll continue to explore this. We'll talk about shading in the next video. So stick around, see you then.